Picking back up with Chapter 5 of Zero Tolerance, this one will run about an hour long. It's 20 pages long. And this one's titled Alt-Right, Racist Liberals. We come to the final possibility as to the true nature of the alt-right, and by all accounts we find this one to ring the most true, taking into consideration the same initial premise as the one introduced in the previous possibility, namely of the alt-right appearing as an alternative to the mainstream American conservatism, which it had accused of betraying American conservative values. The core from which the alt-right label had sprung also contains elements of vague racialism, including some sort of awareness of the Jewish question, and no less vague white nationalism. In total, we find only two definitive elements to the alt-right: its adherence to Americanism and, ironically, its vagueness when it comes to the very issues on which we supposedly share some common ground with them, which prompts their calls for alliances and not punching right. The incredible vagueness that is the definitive trademark of the alt-right is due to its big tent approach when it comes to both what people make up its followers and the people it finds itself in alliance with. For all intents and purposes, the alt-right is the quintessential example of everything that our champions had warned us against. Just go back and read their criticism of alliances and mass movement approaches that we presented earlier in this article. You'll find that the alt-right has been consistent in ignoring all those warnings. By trying to amass itself as many followers as possible, the alt-right has made itself too vague to identify. Only things that it definitively advertised were that it is right-wing, a new alternative to mainstream American conservatism, and that it seeks to establish a white ethno-state, yet more vagueness. However, in its pursuit of becoming something hip, as is even advertised by the use of the alt prefix itself, alt is the new/neo/post/meta. It had delved into contemporary youth and internet/meme culture, becoming that edgy hipster conservatism for millennials. This method in theory sounds oddly similar to the American 90s marketing craze for appealing to teenagers with extreme themes. Picture here of some kids drinking sodas, looking totally rad. Caption: No, this isn't your grandpa's conservatism. This is the new rad and wired alt-right brand extreme conservatism. We have fun, memes, and micro machines. Are you extreme enough to handle it? Get yours today, Pt5. Warning: Micro machines not officially affiliated with the alt-right and are sold separately. Back to main text. Of course, despite the labels and the appeal to internet culture, alt-right is still too deeply rooted in Americanism and thus in liberal logic, but combined with vague racialism, in effect becoming nothing more than racist liberalism. The alt-right simply feels that Americanism has been ruined, vehemently denying that it was never any good in the first place by non-whites. Indeed, the ranks of the alt-right are full of former liberals and libertarians who had been shocked into their newfound racialism by the new progressive generation of SJWs. Now, to protect their beloved Americanism, they wish to arm themselves with that vague racialism and the goal of a white ethno-state, quote-unquote. We've already covered the issue of Americanism extensively in the previous segment, so now let us discuss this vague racialism and what it effectively amounts to. The vagueness of the alt-right racialism is present throughout its entire narrative and is defined by the end goal of establishing the white ethno-state, which holds no more specific aspects to it other than that it would be a homogeneous society, and that alone is the key to success. As a result, the alt-right requires only just enough racialism to prove how a homogeneous society is better than a multicultural one, and that's it. Anything else becomes just icing on the cake after the fact, depending on what kind of racialist the alt-right had managed to attract into its fold. Thus the degrees of racialism varies. Quote, There was a reason the Young movement settled on a definite program and avoided using the word racialist in it. The concept of racialism is unclear and indefinite, which makes it impossible as a basis for a movement. It also does not offer any standard to judge what the members actually stand for. The more vague this concept is, and the more open to interpretation it becomes, the more it appeals to everyone. Anyone can see whatever they want in the movement. Injecting an idea into a political struggle that is vague and capable of many interpretations will ultimately destroy the solidarity and lead to harsh fighting within the fellowship. A political movement cannot survive if the individual is allowed to decide on his own what he believes the movement stands for. It is outrageous that people are running around today with the racial symbol on their hats, and how many of them have created their own definition of what the idea means. Everyone interprets the idea as he happens to understand it. Such a wide variety of opinions is unacceptable as a basis for a fighting political movement. I am not even referring to their separation from reality and particularly the ignorance these people display when it comes to the soul of the nation, which is commonly seen in these racialist movements. these John the Baptists of the 20th century. The value of these people is clearly illustrated in the way they are treated by the left-wing parties. They find them ridiculous, so they let these people rant and rave and just laugh at them. Anyone in this world who is not hated by his enemies is worthless as a friend to me. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf, Volume 1, Chapter 12. There's the crime statistics, the IQ charts, the comparison of cultural achievements, white flight, all sorts of arguments that to fascists and National Socialists are entirely secondary. We'll use them, but they are not our primary and definitive arguments, which further showcases how much our goals and those of our alt-right allies differ. Their white ethno-state goal amounts to little more than a white, liberal, gated community expanded to the size of a whole country, something we've already outlined in one of our previous articles. No wonder they are excited about Trump's promise of a literal big wall. It is the ultimate huge picket fence around their neighborhood. Now they just need to get the whole of society to agree with them on keeping the Jews and darkies out of the neighborhood with their overton window petition. What happens is that the alt-right finds itself between the average contemporary Americanism that doesn't mind non-whites and treats everyone as individuals, the mainstream American right wing, to which it poses itself as an alternative, and the progressive liberal SJW crowd that are taking Americanism to its logical self-destructive conclusions, the mainstream American left wing. The alt-right wants exactly the same as the former group, minus the non-whites and the kind of whites that promote the latter. They fail to realize that the latter are a direct product and result of the liberal mentality of the former, the SJW seen as the logical progression of the kind of racialist/Enlightenment principles on which the United States was founded. The alt-right attacks the late-stage symptoms of natural death compounded by disease, not the reason for natural death, and is therefore ineffective against the opportunistic disease itself as well, as their solutions are always half measures. An attempt to freeze the decay and disease at a certain stage of their development in perpetuity and proclaim that to be their ideal. Their conflict with the American political mainstream, both left and right, is premised on the same notion. Non-whites get out. We don't want to share the fruits of liberalism. They're all ours. Ours. Don't touch my toys, shitskin. Whereas the American right does want to share on equal and fair terms, and the American left is willing to sacrifice whites in order to give all of it up to the non-whites. Sure, the non-whites ruin the fruits of a liberal society and break all of the toys. However, those things were no good to begin with. A further interesting point to highlight would be the prevalent opposition to socialism that exists within the alt-right, including the socialism of National Socialism and not just Marxist socialism, or its successor, cultural Marxist socialism. OG Marxist socialism, which aims towards communism, pursues the goal of the formula, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. Cultural Marxist socialism develops that formula further into from each white according to his ability to each non-white according to his needs. However, the alt-right likewise opposes National Socialism, the entire foundation of which is, of course, duty and service, of which the liberal mindset wants neither, just as much as it opposes the idea of having to give up its cummies and general liberal frivolities for redistribution among other whites, or giving them all up to non-whites. Comfortable and safe suburban bourgeois life, liberty from responsibilities and duties, and the pursuit of happiness, i.e., hedonistic pleasures and cummies. That is the true slogan of Americanism, and thus the slogan of the alt-right, which only attaches to that a sign reading, "No niggers, Jews, or other non-whites allowed." It comes then as no surprise why so many in the alt-right worship the American 50s, when Americanism was strong and the non-whites were fewer, but they ignore that the 60s had come about as a direct result of the previous decades. Quote, "If this society were not ripe for death, would it so willingly hearken to the Jewish and liberal song of death? Would it cooperate so readily? James Mason, Siege 7.19. Quote, "It is not physical acts or hardship which bears down on our people and drives them unconsciously toward national and racial suicide. It is a spiritual failing, a disease of the spirit which has our people down and beaten. Our people are rotting from the inside, no matter how the outside gives the appearance of prosperity and happiness." George Lincoln Rockwell, White Power, Chapter 2. Fascists and National Socialists, on the other hand, want to eradicate the very core underlying problem, hence there is no room for idolizing the 50s or Americanism in general. It's all wrong. We cannot be allies with those who are employing half measures for what is to us half goals. Therein is hidden the lie of us having the same goals based on the idea that both sides are rooted in racialism. Sure, we have some similar starting point if we bring everything down to a common denominator of actually recognizing that races exist and matter to social organization, yet our racialism is anything but vague, and when taken to its logical ends, it will necessitate the destruction of liberalism even if it calls itself Americanism. The alt-right wants to stop the train halfway to its final destination by addressing some symptoms of the degeneracy while leaving the core of modernity intact. We want to go all the way, so a conflict between us for the train controls is inevitable. To call us fellow travelers would be as delusional as it would be to say that a priest going to church is a fellow traveler with a sodomite who is going to a gay bathhouse located halfway down the same road. As we deal with absolutes of truth and lies, and not practicality for the sake of an all-white liberal playground, our own racialism goes far beyond the limits of what the alt-right requires for the goals. Moreover, fascism and National Socialism in reality hold a monopoly on racial values, as it was only the fascist and National Socialist worldview that took the fundamentals of racial principles to their logical conclusions and stuck with them as the end goals, ready to not only promote but to fight and die for them. Only fascists and National Socialists can declare themselves to be real proponents and defenders of racial values. Moreover, to be their sole champions, as opposed to the big, vague tent that is the alt-right and its intellectual, racialist sleepwalkers, whose idea of active struggle is as laughable as it is sad evidence of the current state of affairs. Quote, if National Socialism is to conquer, it must declare this set of ideas absolutely and exclusively as its own. Here, too, it has the duty and the right to stress that any attempt to maintain the race-based idea outside the confines of the National Socialist German Workers' Party is pointless and impossible, and in most cases such claims are outright fraud. If anyone today accuses the movement of acting as if it owned the race-based idea, there is just one single answer. We not only own it, but for all practical purposes, we created it. Nothing that previously existed under the name racialist was fit to influence the destiny of our people in the slightest, because these ideas all lacked clear, unified formulation. In most cases, these ideas were a collection of mere isolated, disconnected convictions which varied in their soundness. They often contradicted one another and never had any cohesion among themselves. Even if this cohesion had existed, it was too weak to build a movement from. This is what the National Socialist movement accomplished alone. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf, Volume 2, Chapter 5. Indeed, fascism and National Socialism are the only logical conclusions to any legitimate racial values and racial thinking, whereas alt-right racialism has more in common with the kind of redneck racism imagined by mainstream liberals. Quote, redneck racism was based on hate, fear, ignorance, and plain snobbery, etc. Hitler's kind of racialism and Manson's was and is based upon natural order. James Mason's Siege 4.19. It's referring to Charles Manson there. With the alt-right, the intellectual racialist sleepwalking is a product of their redneck racism. They simply hated other races for immediate emotion-driven reasons. Not that there's anything wrong with that, as this is an instinctual manifestation of a deeper truth, rather than by virtue of having any fundamental reasons rooted in a definitive worldview, of which there is only one, that of the truth of fascism and National Socialism. Picture here Seinfeld with the caption that says, not that there's anything wrong with that. Caption, redneck racism is fine by us when it comes to the average folk. However, if you wish to lead your people with racial values, you are obliged to know the fundamental underlying reasons for this instinctual behavior and turn it into a social doctrine. Main text. They utilized racialist thinking for pragmatic and utilitarian reasons alone to justify their emotional drives after the fact, without ever taking that thinking to its logical conclusion, being fascism and National Socialism. Again, they need it only inasmuch as it helps them create their all-white liberal playground ethno-state where they don't have to deal with non-whites at all and can wallow in liberal degeneracy that fully comprehensive racial thinking would fundamentally oppose. Their racialism serves the goal of excluding non-whites from white societies, and that is it, merely a means to an end. Fascism and National Socialism take racial thinking to its logical conclusions and uphold racial values as values in and of themselves within the model of the organic state, where a vague racialist can at most be simply proud of having been born a certain race. In the fascist National Socialist worldview, being born into a certain race is but a premise, as that alone is not enough. To be born Aryan is not enough to justify pride. It is a lifelong obligation of duty and service to live up to the destiny of your Aryan blood. When racial origin is taken for granted with a sense of entitlement, it will inevitably lead to decay and racial ruin. Instead, one must view it as a mighty responsibility before all those who came before, those alive, those who will come after, and to the truth itself. There is no room here for egotistical pride and conceit. This is the meaning of the medieval chivalry motto, noblesse oblige, or nobility obliges, meaning that one's noble ancestry constrains to honorable behavior, thus privilege entails to responsibility, not conceit and entitlement. I gotta read that again, that's pretty good. Nobility obliges, meaning that one's noble ancestry constrains to honorable behavior, thus privilege entails to responsibility, not conceit and entitlement. This notion has existed in literature as early as Homer's Iliad. Quote, when we say Romanian nation, we understand it as all Romanians alive and dead who lived on this land since the start of its history and those who will live on it in the future. Corneliu Zilea Cordrianu, for my legionaries. Quote, the nation is a being of a higher order existing independently of those individuals of whom it is temporarily composed. It is not a physical being with a head, arms, legs, eyes. It is a moral and historical entity which lives and acts in human history, carrying its national symbols. Dmitry Lotic, Ljotic. Never heard of him. No idea how to pronounce that. Lotic. Jotic. Not sure. Quote, I am not free to think as I wish. I can only live in relation to the dead of my race. They and my country's soil tell me how I shall live. Auguste Maurice Barrés. Once we let self-interest, quote, once we left self-interest become the ruler of a people, the bonds of social order are broken. When man focuses on chasing his own happiness, he falls from heaven straight to hell. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf, Volume 1, Chapter 11. Main text. Meanwhile, the attitude of our would-be allies has been elaborated on in the same older article that we are now linking to for a third time. Yet let us go back to a claim we made just a bit earlier, namely of the methods employed by the alt-right and how laughable and sad they are. The alt-right's insistence on it and its methods being new leads them down the path of the predictable claim that since they are new, they are untried and prove themselves to be successful by claims the true consequences of which will be made apparent only sometime in the future, had we not already seen this new path been done to death before. If one is to actually read the works of George Lincoln Rockwell, the parallels between what had been advertised by his allies at that time and what the alt-right advertises now are so great that we have released a bait-and-switch article a couple of months ago, publishing excerpts from Rockwell's books and substituting some names in there for those relevant to the contemporary situation. How is it that the entirety of alt-right's shtick has been around since the 50s, and yet they imagine themselves to be new and innovative? Frankly, the only difference between then and now is the appearance of the internet, which, however, is but a new tool or medium for the same old methods that we have already discredited earlier in this very article. Mass movement approach doesn't work. Mass conversion via propaganda doesn't work. Purely intellectual appeal doesn't work. Presentability and respectability of the suit and tie look don't matter, and it doesn't matter if you have a new tool to play with if the very premise of these methods is faulty. The new tool may be well and good, but the way and the goal for which it is used renders that tool useless. Why hasn't anyone learned their lessons and continued to repeat the same mistake for decades? Oh, there's a picture here. It's from The Simpsons. It's a dude scattered with a bunch of rakes scattered around him. And the caption says, "What repeating the same stupid mistake for 50 years looks like. Keep watching the GIF for the next 50 years for the full experience." Well, there's no GIF here. I'm reading from a PDF right now, but I'm sure it would be hilarious. So I guess this was posted on their website at some point in time. I never got to see it. I saw a link to it online the other day, but it was dead. A few months ago, 4 or 5 months ago, I found a website called Siege Culture, where James Mason, I found it from Radio Werewolf, and James Mason uploaded some speeches, audio clips, and some new articles on current events mainly. I enjoyed that quite a bit, but otherwise not too much new there really. But it was taken down the other day. Say the other day, probably like a couple weeks now, but it's unfortunate. Hopefully they get a new website back up. I would like to continue hearing more from Mason. I like that. I like him quite a bit. These know-it-alls cannot understand that being dignified or refined or reasonable has not helped any of the right-wing movements so far to success. And that's a quote from George Lincoln Rockwell, This Time the World, Chapter 20, main text. The most likely primary reason why these mistakes had formed an inescapable loop is that these very practices always lead a group to a quiet death in obscurity and irrelevance. Thus, nobody in the next generation of would-be political activists even realized that there used to be this 1, 2, 10, 30 groups over the decades that have attempted this song and dance already. Each new generation succumbs to these same rationalistic, reasonable ideas as the default logical path to take, and are not aware of the existence of the mass grave of forgotten groups and organizations that had died on this road, with the only warning being a sign with a swastika saying, "Turn back," yet none will listen. Nobody is willing to learn from the experience and vast knowledge of our champions, as they are dismissed out of hand for the same rationalistic, reasonable mindset that upon seeing the swastika immediately jumps to the same tired assumptions that we had already criticized here earlier. Quote, "Dumb Nazis, this isn't how you win. I know best, so I'll do this new and genius in its simplicity approach." Yet they never seem to wonder why this self-evident and simple approach hasn't been done before. For if they had, they would have discovered the mass grave right beneath their feet. Instead, they go ahead and venture forth to assured failure. To summarize, a group appears on the scene. Does the respectable, presentable, entryist mass movement, "We're not Nazis, please stop saying that," mass appeal big tent song and dance, dies in obscurity and departs from the fringes of public consciousness where it was trapped for the entirety of its existence. New group, ignorant of all this and naive, repeats the exact same steps and ends up the same way. Rinse, repeat, over and over for the last 50 years. An accursed loop perpetuating itself from sheer arrogant ignorance and naivety. This is, of course, exactly why the alt-right poses no threat to the system and the Jews. It's already seen this before and knows how it will go. To paraphrase an earlier Hitler quote we've given, the value of these people is clearly illustrated in the way they are treated by the system. It finds them ridiculous, so it lets these people rant and rave and just laughs at them. And let us be honest here, there is plenty to laugh at. Spencer at Texas A&M. Spencer. I feel like I've heard that name before. Fat guy with the beard. I think his wife or girlfriend cheated on him. I could be way off, but I think that's him. I'm not sure. I'll just leave it alone. First thing we hear when watching the Spencer talk in Texas is, you went to a Star Trek convention. Shit, must have clicked something else by mistake. No way, this is the Spencer talk. Surprising at first, but with the benefit of afterthought, it does seem fitting for just who Spencer is. Quote, "You like to wear sweatpants. It's all woo," end quote. Spencer, slow down the cringe engine. No can do, Captain. I'm giving it all she's got. Quote, "These are elective identities." End quote. Being a Trekkie, yes. Oh, I'm having a hard time finding out what's a direct quote and what's not here. It says, "These are elective entities," quote unquote. Being a, quote, Trekkie, end quote. Yes, perhaps, if you're a complete loser, but wearing sweatpants is an elective identity? Who the hell wears sweatpants as a definitive part of who they are? It would appear that Spencer can only communicate with those like himself, utter losers and cringy imbeciles. The way he talks, he's almost whispering in that faux soothing tone, just making him look like that much more of an emasculated creep, like he's trying to emulate Mr. Rogers with a vest instead of a sweater. Quote, as a European, you're an America... I fucked that up, but it seems pretty... As a European, quote unquote, you're an Ameriburger, lad. I can tell the story of the Greeks and the Romans, quote unquote. And then it's got a picture of a Twitter post, Richard B. Spencer. Richard Spencer. I'm going to have to look him up. I'm not entirely sure who this fellow is. Richard B. Spencer. Twitter post, homosexuality has been a part of European societies and culture for millennia. It's not going away, not something to get worked up about. And then the caption is, he sure can tell some bullshit stories, all right. Quote, about the coming of Christianity. End quote. But you're only a self-professed cultural Christian, Spency. You don't know jack shit about actual Christianity. Maybe if you listened to some Mysterium Fasces, you'd know a bit more. I am going to look that up. Mysterium Fasces. Episode 1, Christian Fascism. Florian Gray is the name I keep seeing. Nihilism. Host. Oh, it's a podcast. All right. Okay. Anyways, he takes long pauses, allows the hecklers to shout some quip, and replies to it in that same passive, soothing fashion. No, you're wrong, sir. You're in enemy territory, Dickie. Nobody there is your friend, no matter how much of a passive pussy you present yourself as, which isn't hard. It's in your nature. Dickless Dickie allows the people in the crowd to direct the talk by responding to every heckler he hears. Like this wasn't a planned talk, but a heart-to-heart conversation between a counselor and some troubled youths, channeling Mr. Rogers hard, and perhaps that was exactly the angle Spency was going for. However, that angle is weak, pathetic, and completely ineffective. The Sesame Street approach may seem appropriate in that modern college students are easily triggered like little children with designated safe spaces, decorated like baby rooms. However, they are trained to be mindless and foaming at the mouth, attack dogs whenever presented with anything that challenges their delusions. Either way, the constant distraction to talk to hecklers renders this entire exercise in futility unworthy of even being called a talk or presentation. It's Spencer trying to be the nice guy with SJWs. Why, however? For the fame and popularity? Is that all this is for Spencer? Quote, oh, he's a professor, so that means he must be correct. Chuckles. Further cringe. To which the audience predictably reacts, but what is truly interesting is how Spencer reacts to the crowd. I just got a picture of him here. I gotta uninvert my colors. And it's a picture of him in a vest, button up, jeans, leather belt, and he's like a prissy boy, like the little wrist flick thing you see them do. There's two images of him doing that, and the caption in the first image is gay. Gay. And the second caption, or the caption in the second image, is tee-hee, don't hit on me, you silly boys. What? Main text. How does one manage to be a bigger presenting faggot than an outright faggot like Milo? More talking to hecklers. Also note all the weird pauses. One lasts up to 9 or 10 seconds straight as he just stands there awkwardly. Joke about a fat clown that Dickie himself is just so fucking giddy over that he laughs, like a little boy who just said a naughty word, into the mic with a huge grin on his face. All of these horrible hindrances dominate the presentation of whatever the hell this train wreck is supposed to be. Some might argue that he made a few good points, but this is a backwards logic as you make up excuses for single miniature instances which are more or less okay or moderately good, which are obscured by and large by the overall spirit of awkwardness and weakness. This is a downward spiral, for while NPI conferences were cucked and weak, here Spencer presents himself not only as that, but also as a joke. And, oh, look at this. You got some green text in this PDF here. So this is in green text format. If you don't know what that is, just look it up, I suppose. It's like a quote or an implication I think its intended purpose is to be for implications only. But that's not really the way it's used anymore. I don't believe. So, in green text, listens to heckler, does weird hand gestures. Alright, let's cool down with the autism a little bit, giggles. OMG, I said that internet meme in real life like, oh my gosh, giggle. Just joking. Main text. The mentality is amazing, quote. I did something naughty and it was so exciting, but now I should cuck myself over it, end quote. In the meantime, his supporters in the back go bananas over hearing a meme offline. And it is an utter joke, cringy as all hell, but apparently this is what deserves praise. This defines the entire next segment as well, as Spencer finally gets to deliver actual points, but at the end, in another pause, replies to a heckler, quote, I'm not paranoid, they're just out to get me, end quote, effectively undoing all of what he said prior, instead of driving home those points on globalization and rootlessness by showing how the leftist/SJW narrative says some of the same things in different words. He effectively painted himself to be an awkward cook with that joke. Another pause. He goes back into the actual meat of the presentation, only to engage another heckler over some sign that he has shown, and each time Spencer readily takes the bait and addresses it and makes a long spectacle of it, which brings him back into that awkward cringe territory. In effect, it is not Spencer running the crowd, but the crowd controlling Spencer, which is easy because he is very responsive, too slow, makes long pauses, leaves all the possible ways in for hecklers and the crowd to exploit, and it is truly pathetic how much of a hapless leaf in the wind he is during the entirety of this event. And his reaction to the hecklers is always the same thing, awkward pause, analyzing what is happening, replying or explaining what is happening, then giving it a soft chuckle or making a funny joke or meme, and then giggling to himself like a schoolboy. Uninvert my colors again. There's another picture of him, and it's from the same presentation or speech, whatever it is he's doing here. Caption, okay, Al, it's fine, Preston. And that's it. Main text. Finally, the SJW part of the bored to death crowd decided to add some kind of excitement to the even and a lot of commotion. Finally, the SJW part of the bored to death crowd decided to add some kind of excitement to the even and a lot of commotion happens. I'm not sure what's going on there. A lot of commotion happens with the crowd obscuring the view of the stage. Quote, let's sit down and talk with each other, end quote. So talking to the hecklers was always part of the goal for this event. Quote, I'm about to finish up and we'll give everyone a chance at Q&A, end quote. That's it? You did nothing but reply to them anyway. Where's the actual talk? We are 25 minutes in, and half, if not most of it, was lame memes, awkward pauses, answering hecklers, and Spencer giggling at his own jokes and how clever he thinks he is. But that is most likely Spencer's strong suit, to talk with people rather than talk at people. He's certainly a failure at the latter. Spencer's whole style at this event and the way he tries to calm down the crowd makes it look like he is going for an SJW whisperer counterpart to Cesar Millan. However, lacks any success, so he finally tries raising his voice momentarily before once again returning to the real points and manages to keep going all right, until he is once again distracted by a heckler, to whom Spencer responds, quote, this world needs a better class of heckler, end quote. Proof to the contrary, Spency, as you take the bait and allow him to control you. Every time Spencer does something that is moderately alright, his talking points being already passé within our own circles, their delivery being fairly flat, though steady, he immediately stumbles and ruins everything on demand of some random body in the audience, reacting in a way that makes him look like a fucking buffoon. Quote, you know who I am? End quote. What the fuck was that? Was that another reference? And some half-assed delivery of a whisper yell? He wraps up and does a wide wave into the audience like a 5-year-old. A wide wave, like with his whole arm. I don't know. The Q&A goes along in the same pace. It feels more dynamic as it is conversations, but ultimately it's just more cringe. Richard Spencer versus Roland Martin. Richard Spencer's speech at NPI conference. Richard Spencer at the alt-right conference. Quote, "The fakers know why they are fakers. They have too much to hide, too much to protect, too much to lose. The attraction of any real talent or genius or personal drive is a direct threat to them, as it threatens to take away not only their livelihood, but also rob them of their star status." James Mason Siege 8.21. We can already hear the rushed objections of our alt-right allies as they hurriedly try to present examples of their success. Namely, they legitimately seem to think that they memed Trump into the presidency of the United States. The absolute absurdity of this claim is indescribable. The alt-right had not even registered in the widespread American public consciousness until Hillary Clinton had put it there with her alt-right speech, which likewise ushered the birth of the hipster conservative alt-right without the racialism aspects that we had explored earlier. Time for an overdue reality check. The alt-right did not make Trump possible, but the exact opposite, which is precisely why they have been riding his coattails online via memes, podcasts, and some articles, which apparently in their mind amounts to activism. In reality, as per the Lemming principle, the masses, including mainstream conservatives, simply did not speak out in force against the progressive liberal SJW bullshit, as it was the dominant narrative that was unopposed in the public discourse at the highest level. Hence, nobody felt safe criticizing it. Until Trump, who legitimized that criticism and thus carved out a safe space for lemmings to voice their discontent, which they would have never voiced otherwise, further showcasing their cowardice. However, the wide masses and overwhelming bulk of Trump support did not share in any sort of racialist thinking whatsoever, instead falling back on the mainstream conservative individualist fairness principles of each man being able to make his own way regardless of skin color. Take another drink here. It were these people, the average conservative lemming who isn't racist in the slightest but does not support progressive liberalism and feels betrayed by the Republican Party, that got Trump elected, not the alt-right, which presents only a fringe element of Trump support. The actual figureheads of this core of Trump supporters who had contributed to his victory are actually figures like outlets like Rebel Media and InfoWars, who had overtaken the Young Turks in their subscriber count, as well as various rationalist YouTubers like Sargon of Akkad. These are the real sample representatives of the core of Trump supporters who got him elected, not the alt-right. They often self-identify as the new media that is rooted in American conservatism, including Sargon of Akkad, even though he says he is a center-left liberal, since that translates from European to American right/left scale as something pretty close to American conservatism. So if anyone got Trump into office, then it was this new media conservatives. Hell, even campus reform had done more for Trump's victory than the alt-right, with such real-life actions as the one in the video below. Though let us be fair and admit that the lemmings stick to their bias regardless of what facts are presented to them, which holds true for both Trump and Hillary supporters, so you can safely bet that most of them voted for Hillary regardless of having been made to look like absolute idiots. These people have been actively, visibly, and publicly campaigning for Trump ever since he started, whereas the alt-right, with its online activism, was known to nobody outside the fringe political circles. It gained any level of public recognition only because Hillary Clinton had attempted to use the alt-right as another way of attacking Trump to discredit him, just as it was done when he was pressed about his apparent KKK support base. Now imagine if the KKK claimed that it was them who got Trump elected. It is just as farcical and laughable as the alt-right claim. In the long run, one could say that the alt-right actually owes far more to Hillary for their meager level of publicity than to Trump. Mark Dice, another representative of Trump's real support base, video below, timestamp. There's supposed to be a video here titled Top 10 Insane Social Justice Warriors of 2016. Top 10 Insane Social Justice Warriors 2016. I'll just try and look that up real quick, see if I can't find it. T16. Okay, so it's still there. The YouTube account is Mark Dice, and word for word. And then it has the infographics about the interest over time regarding the video. So from June to May 2015 to 2016 respectively. There's almost no interest, and then it peaks right about September. August 21st through August 27, 2016 peaks. And then it dies down almost immediately. Caption: search results for alt-right, starting from Trump's announcement that he'll be running for president and ending with his victory in November. The spike coincides with Hillary's speech about the alt-right. Oh yeah, we got Trump elected, fam. And what had effectively happened as a result of that speech? The alt-right brand was somewhat manufactured, as all the Trump supporters took on that mantle and started skewing it from its original sources and its racialist aspects to just refer to the hipster conservatism for millennials. So now you have pointless and moronic videos on the issue of the hijacked brand name, like the one where Red Ice Radio talk about Paul Joseph Watson of InfoWars misrepresenting the meaning of the alt-right. Hipster conservatives be like, quote, look at me, I'm the alt-right now, end quote. Now the OG alt-right is being pushed out even further into the category of an unfortunate and unwanted fringe, whose existence can be explained away in the same fashion one Negro Trumpist explained away Trump's KKK support base, quote. Alt-right and people like that, they come out from under the rocks all the time around this time. That got nothing to do with Donald Trump, we're all Americans, end quote. This is the definitive attitude of the majority of Trump's support, the actual support that did get him elected. They regard the alt-right to be but a fringe element that is irrelevant, and to add insult to injury with the appropriation of the alt-right label, they can now relegate the OG racialist alt-right as a fringe element of the real hipster conservative alt-right. Now go back and read once again Hitler's warnings about mass movements and alliances and how they would diffuse a group and render it immobile, not that the alt-right had much going for it in the first place anyway. And while the alt-right is absolutely harmless to the system, for it practices the same time and again failed approach, they do give it a fair share of coverage. However, it is not done out of fear of the group itself. Indeed, they manage to successfully mock it non-stop, but for the exact same reason that Hillary brought it up in the first place. They are trying to use the alt-right to smear Trump, which is of course completely futile, but it gives the alt-right itself a false sense of its importance and achievements. They love telling the media that they got Trump elected, a delusion that the media is only too glad to capitalize on, regardless if they realize the truth of the matter, because that claim fits into their own narrative. The Jew-run media doesn't actually attack them as a credible enemy, it only uses them to try and discredit Trump. What's more, the Lugan press would have utilized the alt-right for its narratives in either Trump or Hillary victory. With Trump's victory, they showcase how evil racists had been emboldened by it, hence all the fake attack stories on Hillary supporters that have become so prevalent. With Hillary's victory, they would have instead talked about how evil racists are lashing out against Trump's defeat. Even the term white lash would have still existed in case of Hillary's victory, each time using the alt-right as an avenue of attack on Trump. The fantasy world in which the alt-right lives is a fantasy world that the Jew media is only too happy to fuel, as they both pretend that the alt-right is something more than what it actually is, which makes it all the better for the Jews when they easily beat it down with sheer mockery. The alt-right huffs and huffs, but cannot produce a single puff. But the Jew giddily pretends to be walking against a powerful gale, to look all the more heroic for it, although there is always another additional possibility as to why the Jew media pays so much attention to the alt-right, which is likewise rooted in its harmlessness. Quote, during all their direct attacks against the staunch patriot, the Jewish lovers of sweet reason employ two equally dirty indirect plays. They build up sincere but harmless anti-communist outfits like the John Birch Society by showering them with publicity to draw off the growing hordes of maddened Americans from any real and therefore dangerous activity, and secondly, they open up a heavy media bombardment of lies about Hitler and National Socialism in order to destroy by discrediting Nazis like ourselves without giving us any publicity. George Lincoln Rockwell, This Time the World, Chapter 12. Yet the alt-right insists on having memed Trump into office using nothing but their own online presence, of which the wider masses were not even aware of until that Hillary speech, and even thereafter the interest dropped again as real core of Trump support regard the racialist alt-right as nothing more than another weak-lying press attack on his persona. All this online activity and the power of the internet could not do jack shit to transform what the alt-right was doing into anything tangible, and what they were doing was producing content for the immediate consumption of their own already existing audience and not the wider masses, despite their praise of the mass movement and Overton window approaches. The alt-right racialist sleepwalkers had in effect done nothing other than partially substitute the intellectual methods of message delivery for the meme method. This whole line of thinking stinks of the kind of weak character types that are afraid of any real action and seek the easy and comfortable way out, and what can be safer, easier, and more comfortable than memeing your victory. These very same people, or would-be allies, wanted us to, in effect, do nothing as well for anything that we, fascists and National Socialists, promote and do. They decried as LARPing, or as something that pushes the masses away. Or perhaps they do it because it effectively makes them look bad and forces them to face the reality of their own irrelevance and weakness. Yet they have the nerve to claim themselves to be the brains to our muscle, the presentable and respectable vanguard of the thug rank and file, all the while their sole claim to fame is the silent work of online activism, quote-unquote. Quote, therefore, the friendship of these people for our young movement was not only worthless but downright dangerous. In fact, that was the main reason we chose the name Party in the first place. We hoped that this would scare off a whole swarm of racialist sleepwalkers. This is why we also described ourselves as the National Socialist German Workers' Party. The word party scared off the fanatics who live in the past, as well as the big talkers who spout meaningless phrases about the racial idea. The other part, National Socialist German Workers' Workers, freed us from a whole parade of knights of the intellectual, quote-unquote, intellectual sword, and all the ragged misfits that carry intellectual weapons as a shield to cover their cowardice. Naturally, the most violent attacks on the new movement came from these racialists. Of course, the attacks were not physical, but only with their favorite weapon of pen and ink, just as you would expect from such racialist pinheads. To them, there was something revolting about our principle which stated, if a man offers us violence, we will defend ourselves by violence. They criticized us profusely, claiming we possessed a rude type of worship for the rubber club, that our ranks lack any form of intellect. These quacks fail to realize that in a meeting of racialists, a Demosthenes can be silenced by just 50 idiots who rely on nothing but their lungs and their fists if those idiots do not want to let him speak. The inborn cowardice of the racialist always keeps him out of any such danger. He does not make noise when he works, and he never steps out of the crowd. He is always careful to stay silent. Even today, I cannot warn our young movement strongly enough against falling into the trap of these silent workers. They are not only cowards, but they are all incompetents and do-nothings. When a man knows something is going to happen, and he realizes it is a danger, and he sees with his own eyes the mere possibility of solution, he damned well has the duty and obligation to act. He must make a public stand against evil and openly work for its cure, not work silently. If he does not do so, he is a miserable weakling who has forgotten the meaning of duty and a failure either through cowardice or through laziness and inability. The great majority of the silent workers merely pretend to know what heaven knows. None of them has any ability, but they will all try to fool the whole world with their smokescreen. They are lazy, but with their alleged silent work, they appear to be enormously active and productive. In a word, they are swindlers and political day workers who find the honest work of others disgusting. When one of these racialist moths prefers the darkness in the valley of silence, you can bet 1,000 to 1 that in the dark he is not producing but stealing and stealing from the fruit of others' work. In addition, there is the arrogance and conceited disrespect that this lazy night owl crowd dumps on the work of others. They constantly complain about the works of others in a condescending way, and in so doing, they actually help the deadly enemies of our nationality. Every last follower who has the courage to stand on a table in a tavern surrounded by his enemies and boldly and openly defends his views accomplishes more than 1,000 of these lying, treacherous sneaks. He definitely will convert and win over one man or another to the movement. His achievement can be tested and proved by the success of his activity. However, the cowardly frauds who boast of their silent work and hide themselves in disgraceful anonymity are worthless and may be considered, in the truest sense of the word, useless when it comes to working for the revival of our people. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf, Volume 1, Chapter 12. Quote, as far as this type of racialist fighter is concerned, I can only say to the National Socialist movement and to the German people most sincerely, Lord, guard us from such friends, and then we can easily deal with our enemies. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf, Volume 2, Chapter 10. As for the very few of the figureheads and groups that had managed to actually go out and attempt real-life activism, we had already provided some criticism of their conduct earlier in this article, but there is still more to be said and more of their own points to be refuted. And that'll do it for this recording.